Good evening, and welcome to Wednesday night Bible study at Mount Olive Baptist Church. It's so good to see you all tonight, and it's so good to be here and be seen. I'm the Reverend Sabre Jones, Associate Minister here at Mount Olive, and I am excited tonight to welcome back to the green tablecloth our own pastor, the Reverend Dr. James E. Victor Jr. Pastor, good evening.
Good evening, Reverend Jones. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be across the table from you. So we've been talking for the last 4 weeks almost now about this notion of availability. And tonight is no different as we get closer to Holy Week and Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and then Easter Sunday. Our lesson for Lenten this year is about availability. And we started out with a conversation about Isaiah and his first seeing God. And then we went from that to Samuel and Eli and hearing the voice of God. And then we went from that to Abraham and his hearing God tell him to sacrifice his son whom he loved. And last week we talked about Moses and how our careers are not always our calling, and how God can shift us in the middle of things and send us in a different direction. And so this whole month we've been talking about what it means to make ourselves available to God. And tonight is no different. We're going to be talking about another biblical character and what it means to say, "Here I am," when God calls our name. So let us begin in prayer. Gracious and eternal God, we are so thankful, God, first of all, for this day. Thankful for who you are and who you are in our lives, both individually and collectively. And now, God, we ask that you would help us to make ourselves available to you. Help us to hear you even as we are talking with one another. Help those who are watching and listening to get a fresh feeling, a fresh anointing for who you are in their own lives and what you may be calling us to do. Bless us now in this time and in this hour. Be glorified through this study is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So, Pastor, who are we talking about tonight?
We're going to look at Jacob
Oh,
in the book of Genesis, chapter 31. And we'll read for tonight verses 10 through 18. It's Genesis chapter 31, verses 10 through 18. So I'll take the reading of the text. Text reads thusly: During the mating of the flock, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats that leaped upon the flock were striped, speckled, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, "Jacob." And I said, "Here I am." And he said, "Look up and see that all the goats that leap on the flock are striped, speckled, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and return to the land of your birth." Then Rachel and Leah answered him, "Is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has been using up the money given for us. All the property that God had taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, do whatever God has said to you." So Jacob arose and set his children and his wives on camels, and he drove away all his livestock, all the property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan.
amen. Amen. We often hear about Jacob and this fabulous dream life he got. It's almost as colorful as Joseph's. He dreams about going up and down a ladder, and then he dreams that he needs to run away, and then the next thing we know, he's dreaming now that he needs to go back. How did he get to this place? How do we get to the place where God can talk to us and call us by our name and give us an opportunity to answer that kind of call?
Well, I think part of it is grounded in an intimate relationship with the divine. And y'all looked over Samuel. It's knowing when God is talking to us, which is sometimes a challenge because we often have other voices and our own swirling in our heads. But there is something about God's voice and the claim that it makes upon us that differentiates it from all other voices. And just as with anyone, you learn that voice through conversation. So the more you are in conversation, the greater the depth of intimacy and knowledge of one another. That's why, the prayer life becomes so important for the Christian, because that's our mode of conversation with the Creator.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've got Jacob here, who and I'm not going to assume that everybody knows the story. So we'll back up just a little bit, and I want to encourage you all as we're talking. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. If you have comments, put those in the chat, so that we can make sure that we try to cover everything that's of interest to you tonight as we're talking. But we've got Jacob, who has a fairly complicated story, and that's putting it nicely. Jacob's name means trickster. So right then we know that we got a problem. He and his brother are twins, and they're fighting in the womb, is what I recall.
Absolutely.
And one grabs the other one by the heel before he can get out, so he can be first. So right from the beginning, we've got some anxiety and some foolishness, is what I want to say, going on. Sibling rivalry.
In
okay.
utero.
Okay.
In utero,
okay.
sibling rivalry.
Happening in Jacob and Esau's story. But tonight we're going to be focused more on Jacob. But it's important to know that part of the story, because that's how Jacob gets to where he is, right?
Right. As you've alluded to, there is this intense competition. And Daddy has his favorite, Mama has her favorite. And there are inheritance issues at stake as to who's going to get the larger portion of Isaac's inheritance, or Isaac's estate, rather. The oldest son is supposed to get 2/3, and the rest of the male children, not the women or the girls, but the male children have to then divvy up the rest of the 1/3. And so they fight, and it is Jacob who, with the help of his mother, tricks his brother Esau out of the birthright. Right. That natural portion that gives him, as the firstborn, the 2/3 of the father's estate. Because he fears for his life, and Esau is known to be a rather hot-headed young man, Jacob runs, and he goes to his uncle's homeland. So Laban, who is one of the central characters in our text tonight, is actually his uncle, because that's his mama's brother. And so he gets there, and initially his uncle welcomes him, kisses him, and it's just a great family reunion. My sister's boy has come home. And then Jacob sees his pretty young cousin, falls head over heels in love with her, and is willing to work for her, which is what her daddy says you have to do. And comes to find out that there's a custom in this part of the world that says the younger daughter cannot marry before the oldest daughter is married, or at least that's what Laban says. So there's the older girl named Leah, the one that Jacob falls in love with and loves for his whole life long, is Rachel. And so after being tricked in this way, after having worked 7 years for Rachel, then he discovers he can't marry her. So Laban has exploited Jacob's labor and good intentions. And then he works the 7 years for Rachel. And then because he loves her so, according to the text, he works the 7 years for Leah. So 14 years at least, he's in the employ or the service of his uncle. And then during the course of that time, Laban continues to trick him. Now, what you see here is a sense of I don't want to use karma, but there's a sense of justice at work here, because the trickster meets the OG trickster.
Right.
And so now, while Jacob is working for his uncle Laban, Laban, according to the text, changes the wages at least 10 times. And he is, every time he sees God prospering him in spite of what Laban is doing, then he flips the script.
Right.
So because Jacob is a shepherd and tending livestock, when a certain aspect or a certain part of the flock begins to double, which is his wages, and is rightfully his for his service rendered, then Laban says, well, let's change the contract in the middle of the stream. Let's change the horses in the middle of the stream. So I know I told you I wanted to speckle livestock, but since they're doubling, I'm going to give you the others that are not prospering. And God does what God does and begins to have those part of the flock begin to double and increase. So that Jacob is constantly being exploited, constantly being oppressed. And now what we see in our text is this is the pretext, or that's the backdrop for his escape. Because our lesson tonight is entitled Deliverance and Direction. And so what we find here is that out of that exploitative context, God provides one, deliverance, but then direction in terms of how to get out, how to leave, how to get free.
Yeah, and even before we actually get to that part of the text that we read tonight, I was thinking as you were describing sort of the background that it is reminiscent of, which is funny because it comes later, but it's reminiscent of the Exodus story where the more Pharaoh tries to punish the people, Exodus says, but they still grew stronger and stronger in number. So Jacob is working for Laban. He's had to work for him 14 years to get the wife that he wanted and the wife that he didn't want. And now he's having to deal with this man who is changing the rules every time there is more livestock to come. They're saying, okay, you get these. No, you can't have those. You get these. No, you can't have those. And in the midst of all of that, God is still producing and still growing Jacob's family and his estate, really, because he's becoming more wealthy in terms of the amount of livestock that he has. So very similar to Israel's story. They're under oppression, but they're still growing, the Exodus text says.
They're still growing. And I forgot one part of the story before we get to our text that's relevant to the story. As Jacob is fleeing to Padan Aram, I can never pronounce that. He's in the middle of a field and he falls asleep. There's a stone for his pillow. And it is there where he sees the angels ascending and descending. And he wakes up and says, surely the Lord is in this place and I didn't even know it. And he names the place Bethel, which means in the Hebrew tongue, the house of God. And Jacob then says to God, because he's unaware of the divine presence at operation and at work in his dream and in this place called Bethel, that if you will give me food to eat, if you will protect me, if you will honor covenant, essentially, then I will make you my God. And God says, okay, bet.
Right.
Bet. Watch me work now.
Right.
And God then does exactly what God said. So even in the midst of his oppression and his exploitation, God is honoring God's promise by prospering him and making him to multiply,
Right.
to grow larger, to increase. He experiences increase when there naturally, one would assume, would be a context of decrease.
Right. I mean, you start off with someone on the run.
Yes.
And running from his own kinfolk. He's running because he's afraid Esau's going to kill him because he's stolen his birthright. And he runs, his mama says, go to your uncle. He runs to his uncle, and then his uncle mistreats him, essentially. And so one would think he would feel like, I don't have anything. But in this moment, this theophany, if you will, that takes place, this dream that he has, then he discovers that God is in fact present even in his running. And that for me is very important, that God can be present in our running. As we are moving through whatever difficulty and challenge we find ourselves in, even if we are running from God, God is present in our running. And when we lay down, God will speak to us.
Show up.
Will show up and
manifest.
will tell us something. And Jacob wakes up from the dream and says, surely God is in this place and I didn't even know it. How often has God been in the place and we didn't even know it? And we've been in a situation where you look back on it. I mean, we say hindsight is 20/20, and it is. You look back on it and you say, oh, that was the Lord.
That was the Lord.
That's why such and such happened, or why so-and-so didn't happen. Now I know.
Or I am still here when I ought not to be
When I
here.
ought not to be. I ought to be, as the ancestors would say, sleeping in my grave.
Yeah.
So this notion that God is present even in our running, and then this promise, this vow that Jacob makes. If you feed me, if you clothe me, and if you let me come back later on to my father's house, then I'll worship you. I'll make you my God. And as you said, God says bet. So and for those who don't know where we're reading, we're looking at chapter 28 in Genesis. Our text for the night is in 31, but to understand 31, you had to go back and read 28. So we get to 31, and he is a man with property now, even though he's still working for his uncle. He's a man with family of his own. And he's a man with brothers-in-laws who got an issue with him, or cousins actually, male cousins who have an issue with him. And their issue is that he is prospering, and they think he's taking away something that belonged to them. So we are back again with this notion of something that belonged to me is being taken by somebody that it don't belong to. So at the beginning of 31, we hear Jacob overhearing his cousins, his male cousins, saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's. He has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. So this idea that I can't have anything unless I took it from somebody else. We got not really sibling rivalry, but family rivalry. Family drama going on at this point. And Jacob is concerned about this, and so God speaks to him in our pericope about what is going on and what he sees. So what is God saying, and what is Jacob's response?
Well, the first thing that God tells Jacob is to pack your bags and leave. Get up out of here, because this place has become toxic. As we talked about a little bit in the green room, and we don't have a green room, but that's what we call it. We like to think we are on a professional level of television now. But in the green room, we talked about the idea that toxic masculinity is not a new phenomenon. So these cousins of his are accusing him of stealing when he's not. He's being blessed. But the only way that they can see God's blessing in his life is it must come by theft. They can't celebrate with him, but they accuse him, and that creates this toxic environment. And God says to him, return to the land of your ancestors and to your kindred, and I'll be with you. So Jacob sent and called his wives into the field, and he says, now listen, you know your daddy been cheating me. And so it's time to go. And I guess that's his way of feeling their pulse or checking the temperature, because these are indeed his uncle's daughters. They are his cousins. Now, that's convoluted. This is Old Testament stuff. You can go to jail for doing that stuff in America today. But these are his cousins. These are his wives. He's checking their temperature. And then that takes us into the text. God has told him to go. And Jacob then in 10, it's almost as if Jacob is telling his own story. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of lapses into a storyteller assuming the story. But it says, during the mating of the flock, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw the male goats that leaped upon the flock were striped, speckled, and mottled. And then the angel of God said to me in the dream. See, and then you shift, and Jacob, and I said, here am I. So there's this back and forth, if you will, between Jacob telling his own story and the narrator telling the story. But what we get a sense of, it's time for Jacob to go. It's during a particular season of the year in which mating is going on, which is how they reproduce the sheep of the flock, increase the flock. And Jacob falls asleep and has a dream, and God says to him, Jacob, and he said, here am I, in the context of the dream. And that's the availability part that is the continuity with the other characters, biblical figures that we've been wrestling with. Jacob, in the midst of an exploitative, oppressive, demeaning, and mistrustful environment, when God shows up, he tells God, I'm here. Here am I.
How challenging is that for us? He doesn't run away. He's already run away once.
Right.
But when he gets to Laban, he stays. And he continues to stay. And God makes a way even in the midst of his trouble. Mm-hmm. And then when God calls him, he says, I'm right here.
I'm right here.
I'm right here.
Before we get to what it means, before we get to how do we do that, I think we got to look at what it means.
Right.
Because what I see in the text that I think is relevant for us today is that Jacob is present, even in the midst of an oppressive regime and an oppressive context. When so often when we catch hell, there's the tendency, I think, for us to check out. So Jacob is fully aware, he's fully present, he's fully engaged. And think of how many of our people check out because the American context seems to be more than we can bear. As it is said in this book of Genesis, he's in a rock howling wilderness. That's the old King James, a rock howling wilderness where things don't make sense, things are always against you. And what we've seen is that everything in this environment is against Jacob. His uncle is against Jacob. His murmuring cousins are against Jacob. His uncle has cheated him, and so his work is not being valued. Mm-hmm. Everything is against Jacob, yet Jacob is still prospering, and Jacob is present. So oftentimes when we are faced with those kinds of regimes, those kinds of oppressive structures, there's a tendency for us to check out. So we do it in a number of ways. Addiction is a way of checking out. Alcoholism is a way of checking out. Not being industrious is a way of checking out. And the list can go on and on. You know, sometimes we just don't show up, and think about the folks that we sometimes see on the street corners and that sort of thing. Those are folks to some degree, in some instances, who have checked out. And it's not that they are not bad people, that they are bad people. They just have checked out for whatever reason.
Life has gotten too hard.
Life has gotten too hard.
They can't, for lack of a better word, they can't hold on any longer. The classic checkout is suicide.
Yes.
And oftentimes what we hear when we hear the letters and the notes and the things that people write before they commit suicide, it generally speaks to this sense of absolute loss and lack of feeling like anything can get better, that everything hurts too much, everything costs too much, everything too much has been taken away and there's nothing left, and it's too hard is usually what we hear. It's just too hard to bear whatever that is. And that's just classic, and it's a very sad estate to find, for someone to find themselves in, and certainly it could have been possible that Jacob would have thought, I've worked 10 years, 10 times my father-in-law has changed these wages. So that means, when I think of that, I think about how long it has taken to get national minimum wage to anything close to what people need in order to really live. Who can live on $7 an hour? But people have to try to survive on that, and so they work 2 and 3 and 4 jobs to try to make ends meet. But here we are with somebody that every time he gets a little bit ahead, somebody comes and takes it away. Changes the rules of the game. Changes the rules, make it different for us, make it less possible for us to move ahead. And instead of getting so downhearted and so disheartened, if you will, Jacob just keeps going. He just keeps trying. And this moment when he says to God, "Here I am," he is saying, "I'm still here and I'm present." I also think, though, that he is also saying, "Look, I'm right here in the midst of all this crazy." I believe that God, that sometimes in our prayer life and in our meditation life, there comes a moment when we really look to God and say, "Listen, I'm over here. I'm here.
I'm here."
So he hears his voice that calls him by his name, and he goes, "Here, I'm present.
I'm present.
Not only am I present, but I'm here in the midst of this crazy, terrible, awful situation, God. See me over here in the middle of this?" And the Lord says, "Yep, I see you." He tells him, "Look up."
Yeah. And I think, as you were talking, the two words that came to me that we didn't talk about earlier, but resonated with me, was despair and hopelessness. And it is his relationship with God that, if you will, beats back despair, which says there's no other way, and hopelessness, which says things can't change. Right. But because he is connected with God, because he has had an encounter with God at Bethel, and God has been faithful, even though he's catching hell, God has still been faithful. I think that's what gives Jacob some buoyancy, some survivability, or some gumption to keep fighting and keep going, even though his life circumstances, or to use a word from the seminary, his Sitzimleben, his setting in life is such that he just can't seem to get ahead or catch a break. And what makes it, I think, worse, it's not outsiders that are doing it to him. It's his own family.
It's family.
And, whenever we are wounded by family, that always makes the pain of this worse. I read an article this morning about a young lady who matriculated to the University of Pennsylvania, and she got to the point where she got accepted into a PhD program, was a Rhodes Scholar, but because she had been abused as a child, and she had a middle class to to lower upper class privileged background, the University of Pennsylvania took that away because they said she falsified her record. And it was really a case of she had suffered so much abuse by the hand of a mother, by foster parents and the foster care system. And now it's like the university is exploiting her because she doesn't fit the mold of the needy student.
Needy student, wow.
So you get this exploitation. She can't get a break. She's worked hard to overcome, separated herself from her mother, worked hard, but she can't get a break. That's what Jacob is experiencing here. But he says, I'm not escaping, I'm here. And I think saying at times, not just keep going, but saying at times I'm here is an act of defiance. That, you used to hear folks sing in the movement, I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. And then they would name everything that could potentially turn them around. So Bull Connor can't turn me around. Dogs can't turn me around. Fire hoses can't turn me around. That's an act of defiance and of self-determination, which is only, I submit, grounded in God. And that's because I'm a theologian. So it's grounded in God. But we have to have those acts of defiance that says, I'm still here, though everything you've done tried to take me out. There's a wonderful poem, I forget the sister that wrote it, that says everything you tried to do, everything you did tried to kill me.
Kill me, right. Celebrate with me, because every day something tried to kill me. And failed.
But I'm still
here. Yeah, it also reminds me of, there's a wonderful scene in The Color Purple where Mr. talks to Celie and tells her, Suge is pretty and Suge can sing and Suge can do all of these things. What you gonna do? And she said, I might be old, I might be ugly, but thank God I'm still here. I'm still here. This notion that if I'm here, and I think the idea is if I'm here, then there is still the possibility that God can do something. That as long as I wake up another day, something can happen. I imagine, I don't know it, but I imagine that that's what our ancestors thought in slavery. If I wake up in the morning, then there's an opportunity for God to do something about this situation.
When I rose this morning, I didn't have no doubt.
That's it.
So the fact that I am here, and that's what Jacob is saying, I'm here. God, I'm present. So I haven't tried to escape, although that's probably an alluring temptation, but I'm here. I'm here. And so when we get to the point where we operate in those kind of acts of defiance against the systems and against the milieus and the context of exploitation and oppression, then that's when I submit God shows up and gives deliverance and direction.
Well, yeah, maybe. And I say yeah, maybe, because I think the first thing that happens then, as we're reading the text, the first thing that happens then is that he has to stay in what he's in and trust that God's going to show up. And then when God shows up, God says, first thing, look up.
Look up.
Look up.
Change your perspective.
Right. See all of the goats around. And actually, a lot of it, and again, I want to encourage you to go back and read 30 and 31 so that this makes more sense as we're going. But a lot of this language in the dream has to do with the way in which Laban has been trying to cheat Jacob, and God has been foiling that plan. So this whole notion around speckled and mottled and striped flock and who's going to get what. And in the dream, God is saying, I've seen what Laban is doing to you. And what a powerful act that is, to hear God say, I know what you're going through. I know what's happened to you. I know that you got mistreated. I know somebody stole your money. I know somebody took your identity and now you're fighting with the IRS to try not to owe any more money. I know that your best friend left you, or your marriage fell apart, or your loved one died. I know what's going on with you. He doesn't even require that Jacob tell him what's going on. Sometimes there are other stories in the Bible where God asks you, what's going on, what's wrong? So that you can tell the Lord what's going on. God doesn't do his here. Jacob says, here I am. And God said, you know what? Yeah, you are. Yep. And I see that he's been mistreating you. And the unspoken piece about that is, and I'm going to do something about it.
Yeah, which is in and of itself, I think, empowering. You asked earlier, how do we stay engaged? How do we maintain presence? I think that's one of the ways that we do that is that we are assured that God is observing. I mean, you talked about earlier how there is a parallel with the Exodus narrative. Again, part of the Exodus narrative, as y'all looked at, I'm sure, when God called Moses, is Moses, I have seen.
That's right. The
suffering of my people, and I've heard their plaintive cries. Right. And so I'm going to decide to do something about it. And you the one I'm going to use to go. So go tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Which, that's a call on Moses' life, and that created its own sense of, what's the word I want to use? Disequilibrium. Yes. when the call of God also always throws us off balance. But it is, I think, empowering to know that it's not just me. And it ain't even just my neighbor or my kindred, but it's God that sees I'm struggling, and that all of this is being inflicted upon me. 'Cause now, as you rightly alluded earlier, if God knows about it, then God has to do something about it. Because we made a contract, a covenant back at Bethel.
Right.
And we got to do that. The other thing that I see here that helps us to kind of maintain that buoyancy of presence is that Jacob is dreaming. And the power of dreams to change the trajectory of a life can never be underestimated, because the dream says, I can see my reality. I'm experiencing my reality and all of its vicissitudes, its changes, its ups, its downs, its peaks, its lows, its valleys, its high mountains, all of that goes along with it. However, when I can dream, I can see an alternative reality. And that's what Jacob is telling us. Laban has been cheating me, but in that, God is prospering me. And I think when we lose the capacity to dream, we may then have consigned ourselves to despair. And we may have consigned ourselves needlessly to hopelessness. Because as you said earlier, as long as I'm here and as long as God still reigns,
still a chance.
The king got another move.
Something else can happen.
Something else can happen.
Something else can happen.
I may not know what that is. It may not be what I want. Yeah. I may not even be able to see the logical conclusion or end of it. But as long as God is still on the throne, right, something else can happen.
Right. And I particularly like this next section in verse 13, where God rehearses, if you will, for Jacob, their history. He says, I'm the God of Bethel, the one where you anointed a pillow and made a vow to me. And then he gives him the direction. But in 13, right in 13a, he reminds him of their history together. And I think when we remember, when we are in difficult situations, but we can remember the last time God got us out, the last time we felt the presence of God and knew for sure, it was God. Or the last time something happened and we knew if it hadn't have been for the Lord, things would have been the other way. When we remind ourselves of that, when we rehearse those things to ourselves, then we can, in fact, go on, move on, hold on, whatever that is. And right here, God does it for him. So in the times when we can't remember ourselves, God says, remember, I'm your God of Bethel.
Of Bethel, right.
I'm the one that you said, I didn't know the Lord was even in this place. And here I am now to remind you of that and to remind you that you made me a promise.
Absolutely. And I think that's why, as we close out Women's History Month, that's why it's important for women to tell their story. That's why I think Black History Month is important, because it reminds us how God has blessed us, kept us, provided for us, helped us to prosper in some of the most horrendous contexts of life. You know, and that's what the Jews are doing in the Bible. Right. So why should we not be allowed to claim our own stories and say, look at what the Lord has done? That I think is not just self-affirming, but it also then becomes inviting to others to see what God is. I mean, because that's what the first family of faith does here in the book of Genesis. God tells Abraham, I'm going to bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you. Right. And you will be, by telling your story, a blessing to whom? All the nations. So when we can claim our experience with God and not be ashamed of that and not minimize that, but see its relevance and significance to the larger human family, it becomes inviting. And I think it becomes important, as you rightfully noted, because there's the tendency and there's a move afoot to erase our history.
Absolutely.
And if we don't tell what the Lord has done, right, then we impoverish our own community, but then we withhold something else that's unique, that's needed for the larger human family. So it's important. I mean, I think you're right. I made a promise with you at Bethel. I'm the same God that you told me back then, that if I did this, if I gave you food, if I gave you clothing, if I kept you, if I provided for you, you were going to serve me. I've been faithful.
Right. And I'm still being faithful.
And I'm still, even though Laban is cheating you,
right,
I'm still
being faithful.
You got them speckled goats and the model goats and the striped goats too. All of them are yours. Now leave.
Which is how we get to the directions, how we get to the directions. So one of the things that availability brings for us, provides for us, if you will, is a sense of direction. So when we make ourselves available to God, then we are able to hear from God what the next thing to do is. I
think so. And I think sometimes we often want God to do stuff, but we really are not available to whatever the Lord may want of us. And therefore, what I think also happens is then we start rehearsing in our own minds what we're supposed to do and how we should do it. But if we make ourselves available, just open, carte blanche, Lord, here I am here. I'm here. With all that you have given and invested in me, I'm here. Okay, now that you are here, leave. And sometimes I think, well, that means now I got to pack up all these children. I got to get the camels for all these wives. I got to do all of this stuff. God, did you really say for me to go?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because the directions have a cost to them. There's an investment that we have to make when we hear the voice of God. And sometimes that's when we start second guessing ourselves. Well, yeah, I wanted to go back home, but, that plane trip going to cost a whole lot, and I really don't want to do that right now. And so that's when we start undermining, if you will, our own success and God's plans.
Yeah, and so my favorite piece is coming up because it's the women. And what I want to suggest as you were talking, and I was looking at 14 through 16, I realized something. I realized that Jacob, you said earlier, Jacob was telling the women what had happened. He's sort of telling the story. He's talking to them. He's checking their temperatures to see how willing they might be to go back. And in 14, 15, and 16, Rachel and Leah answer him sort of in unison and say, there's nothing here for us. Our daddy has sold us, and he's taken all of the money that he got for us. So whatever your God says to do, that's what you need. That's what you need to do. And it reminds me that it is in the community that we hear and get the affirmation for what it is that God has said to us. So the Lord tells me something in a dream, and I come here, and you and I are talking, and you don't know necessarily, but we're talking, and then you say something. And I go, oh, okay, well, I guess it do mean I'm supposed to go. Or we're having a conversation and I'm sharing with my women friend. I have a group of sister colleagues that are all clergy women, and we get together regularly and talk about all manner of things. And we serve not just as sermonizing partners, which we like to call it, where we craft sermons together, but we also serve as a community to uphold each other. And so what happens is when you're not sure that God said something to you, then you tell that person, listen, I think the Lord told me go get in this D-Men program. What you think? Or I don't really think that's what the Lord told me to do. And then what I got was, yeah, right. Sure he did. So this idea that Rachel and Leah are more than just wives, they're community who have seen what God has done, because they say everything that you have belongs to us and our children. Everything God has given you. So they know who gave Jacob the wealth that he now has, in spite of how his father, how their father has treated him, and that his God has done this for him. So you do whatever your God said. We gonna do whatever your God said do. So in community, we find this way forward, if you will, to listen to really be able to listen to God and really be able to move on what we know or what we believe we hear God say to us.
Yep.
It's amazing.
So God provides a form of deliverance and then also direction.
Right.
Leave. Get out. And, you know, that's, as we talked about earlier, Jacob now has a part to play in his own deliverance. It's not that God is going to come down and part Red Seas for us, but we got a part in our own deliverance. And I think that goes back again, as you alluded to earlier, it goes back to Bethel. Because I made a vow to the Lord. I think of that old spiritual, I promised the Lord that I won't turn back.
Right.
And so I got to honor my vow. And in honoring my vow, often I find the way out. And not only the way out, but in this instance, the way up. Because Jacob is getting paid here. I mean, it's not like he leaving empty-handed. And you alluded to earlier, the Exodus. And, you know, technically this happens after the Exodus story. But canonically, in the ordering of the canon, it comes before the Exodus. But the Exodus shapes everything in Israel's history and its self-understanding, because that's the primary political act where God sets captives free. And so then they order their history backwards from that. So the Exodus is there. And when the children of Israel leave Egypt, they don't leave empty-handed. So the God that sees injustice and exploitation is the God that justly restores. So I think that's at work. So even the wives of Jacob here, Leah and Rachel, we see what our daddy did. But we also see how the Lord blessed you.
We know he cheated you.
We know he cheated you.
Right.
But we also see how the Lord blessed you. So if he say go, then man, what we still waiting on?
Yes, let's get to getting.
Let's get to getting.
Yeah, and it's also amazing to me that back in 28, Jacob makes the vow, and part of what he asks God when he makes the vow, he says, I'll serve you if part of what you do is make it so that I can come again to my father's house in peace. Mm-hmm. This idea that he wants to be able eventually to get back home and hopefully be at peace with his brother Esau, who he's had to run from.
For better than 20 years now.
Right. And the answer that God gives 2 chapters later in 31 is, leave now and go back home. So God keeps the promise. Mm-hmm. He keeps the promise of the vow that Jacob has made. Jacob says, I'll worship you. I'll give you 1/10 of everything I got if you will just keep me and then let me get back home. And when God sends the direction for where to go, he says, you can go back home now.
You can go home. And Jacob has to trust God because he doesn't know Esau's frame of mind.
Well, that's right. And we learned that later on.
We learned that later on.
Right.
Because when he gets back, he's like, okay, which I think is a very cowardly thing, but he says, okay, let me put the children and the wives up and all my livestock, and then I'm going to be at the end of the procession. So if any killing going on, he going to kill all them first and he saves me. But again,
Jacob has always had.
Jacob has to grow like all of us.
Jacob has trust issues.
Yeah, he got trust issues and he got to grow. So, don't y'all be too hard on Will Smith. He got to grow.
Yeah, he did.
He got to grow. And so all of us are hopefully growing. And so he does that. But he still has to trust God because he wants to go back in peace. And God says go back, but he doesn't tell him peace is on the other end.
That it's going to actually be peaceful.
That it's going to actually be. Right. Now it does. It happens to be that, which the writer, I think, is saying, again, here is God being faithful to God's promise. But Jacob doesn't know that initially. We know that as readers because we got the advantage of the text and 2-3 chapters ahead. But Jacob has to trust God in this moment, and God has proven God's self trustworthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Up until now, everything that Jacob has needed, he has gotten, even though Laban has tried to trick him. But back again, just before we close up, because it is getting close, but the notion that we have a part to play in our own deliverance, if you will. Mm-hmm. It seems set when you get to 17 and 18, and it says, so Jacob arose and set his children and his wives on camels, and he drove away all of his livestock and all the property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Paddan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. So he got to get up and got to move, and often we want God to move while we sit. Lord, do the hard work for us and let us just sit. And that does not seem to be what the text is suggesting to us is the right way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have to make an investment in our own liberation. It's the illustration, Lord, give me a job. But you don't look on Indeed to get no job, but you just expecting jobs to come by. Lord, send me mentors, but you don't make yourself available to be mentored. We have to play a part in our own liberation and in God's direction. And when we do, we see how God's hand is already at work where we couldn't see. I think that's why God tells Jacob, look up. I've already done some things here. Look up. He reminds him, as you rightfully said, of the promises made at Bethel, there where the rock is a pillow. But I also think he's saying, Jacob, look at all these sheep.
Look at everything you
got. These goats and stuff. I've already proven myself faithful. So look up, And when we change that perspective, that may be the very introit, if you will, to our engaging ourselves in what God, in the way God wants to set us free, wants to liberate us, wants to demonstrate justice.
So we need to be present if we're going to be available to God, and then we need to move
Here
as
I am.
as God directs.
And when you say, here I am, you're also saying, God, I'm open
Right.
to whatever you want to do. I am open, so don't say I'm here if you don't mean it.
Yeah, really.
I am here. I am present. I am available. We love to sing here in Mount Olive, Lord, I'm available to you. But I wonder how much of that do we really mean?
Mm-hmm. I think that's true. I think oftentimes we want to be available. What happens though is we say, here I am, and the Lord says, okay, go do this. And we go, oh, well, maybe not.
We see the cost.
Yeah, maybe it's too much. I mean, we talked about Moses last week and the fact that he said yes, but then he gave the Lord 4 or 5 good reasons why he won't the one to sin.
I can't talk.
Right. I'm running from the law.
I'm running from the law. I got a criminal record.
Right. I got these wives and children here. I just, now's not a good time, Lord. If you just let me wait until I get finished with this next thing, then I'll do what you want me to do. That's the refrain that we oftentimes use, but God is calling for us to say yes and then move, trusting and believing that whatever the yes leads us to is for our good and for his glory.
And I would contend that, though it's not in our text tonight, negotiations with the divine always fail.
Well,
negotiations.
I have to think about it. I have to do some research.
Lord, I mean, you said, Lord, please let me do this first. And the more we run from God, the more we run into God. And God does not slow his pursuit of us just because we say no.
Just because, no, that is true.
And that, again, I think Daryl and I talked about this a few weeks ago. That really is the power of the ending verse of the 23rd Psalm. And goodness and mercy.
Chase after me.
Chase after me. And part of the goodness is that we are in God's will and in God's plan. And so God is always hunting me down. Even if I say no,
yes.
God is relentless in God's pursuit. And even if I'm recalcitrant, hard-headed, and hard of heart, God does not stop chasing. Goodness and mercy follow me all the days of my life.
That's it. All right. Well, now, so next week we've got one more week of availability. And I can't tell you who we're going to be talking about because I don't know.
I don't remember either.
Yeah,
y'all just come on back next week.
There you go. Come back next week. See who's going to be at the table, and join us.
And what's going to be at the table?
Right, and what the subject will be. But we know it's going to be about availability. We have some announcements for you tonight. I just said our next Bible study will be the conclusion of this series on availability. It'll be next Wednesday at 7 p.m. on all of our social media platforms, and we want to encourage you to come back out for this last segment in this series. We also want you to know that our young adult and adult Sunday school classes will begin a new book discussion on the first Sunday in April. You are invited to join them as they read and discuss Being Disciples, Essentials of the Christian Life by Rowan Williams. In this book study, they will talk about what it means to be a Christian and how we translate that in our daily lives as followers of Jesus Christ. The books are available at local and online bookstores, and to join the discussion, you just need to visit our church website, register for our Sunday school class for your appropriate age level, and then you'll receive a link to join the classes. It's every Sunday at 11 a.m. And for more details, you can go by our church website at Mount Olive BC, mtolivebc.org. We want to invite those of you who like to go out for 18 holes of golf to save the date for our Mount Olive Annual Scholarship Golf Classic. We are back after 2 years, and this is the 7th annual tournament. It'll take place on Wednesday, September the 21st at the Old Hickory Golf Club in Woodbridge, Virginia. It's going to be a day of fun, friendly competition, good fellowship, food, and all for a worthy cause, which is to raise money so a young person can go to school. So mark your calendars now, get your foursomes ready. Registration and signing up will actually begin this month coming in April, so you can get it on your calendar and get ready to have some fun this fall. And then finally, Pastor has an announcement that we've all been looking for because we were about to come back.
Yes, indeed. This Sunday, we will reopen the doors of the Mount Olive Church for in-person worship. We encourage you to come. If you're interested, if you feel comfortable, just make sure that you register. We have slots still available. Registration will close on tomorrow evening. Tomorrow evening registration close, so don't let the registration period close without you having registered to come back to in-person worship. We'll have safety protocols in place. The doors of the church will open at 9 o'clock. Service will begin at 9:30. We ask that you fill out the registration, show that you have been vaccinated, and make sure you bring your mask because we want to keep everybody safe. So the mask keeps you safe, but it also keeps your neighbor safe as well. So we want to make sure that we come, and we pray that the Lord's Spirit would meet us in this place after better than 2 years. We are going to do something unique that we have not done at this church in better than 30 years, now 25 years. When we enter on Sunday, we're going to ring our church bells. And the last time I think the bells of the church were rung was at the funeral of our sainted and beloved pastor, Dr. Aaron A. Mackley. So we're going to ring the bells telling the whole world that we're back, that we're live, we're in effect, and we're going to try to make ourselves available to God. So won't you come, one and all, sign up. You can go to the website. If you don't have access to the website, then call the church. Part of our clerical staff will be here to help you walk through the registration process. Again, we still have slots available, so there's a space for you here at the Mount Olive Church this coming Sunday at 9:30. We'll also maintain our online congregation, so if you can't get in, if you can't register, still join us at 9:30 for the worship. And our Bible studies and church school will be online for the foreseeable future. So we pray that you'll meet us next Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. on our social media platform. Thank you for coming. God bless you. And we hope that you gleaned something important for your life out of this conversation about Jacob and being available in the context of an exploitative context. God bless you.